Hi, everybody. Welcome to Your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. So happy to have all of you along with me today. Backed by popular demand, Michelle Singletary is going to be with us. Before I bring her on, let me just tell you a little bit about Michelle and her amazing background. You all probably know Michelle because she is the nationally syndicated personal finance columnist for the Washington Post. She's been writing her wonderful column. It's called The Color of Money for many, many years now. She also is frequently on many different television channels, on NBC, on CBS, on CNN. She's appeared on Oprah. She's the author of 4 personal finance books, and she's got a new one that is just about to hit shelves. We're talking about that today as well. It's called What to Do with Your Money When a Crisis Hits. And you better believe it was brought upon by the pandemic and the hundreds, if not thousands, of questions that she gets in her email box every single week. Michelle, welcome. Thank you so much for being with me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Thanks for doing this show again. Let me just remind everybody, this is interactive. We're already seeing Charles is with us. Hi, Charles. Thanks for joining us. But let us know you're here. Type your questions and comments in the comments. It'll be our pleasure to weave them into our conversation. Michelle is so knowledgeable on so many topics, and we will be happy to answer your questions in this format as we talk through things. Michelle, let's just jump in and tell me a little about this exciting book launch. What will I find when I open it?
Yeah, so the book, it drops on May 18th, but you can pre-order now. And I wanted to write a book that would help people, with questions quickly. So it's an FAQ type format. What do I do with my money now? What if I've lost my job? Hey, my cousin is asking me to lend them some money because they lost their job. Should I? How do I structure the loan? All kinds of things like that. And it wanted to be the way I explained it at the beginning of the book. It's sort of like when you go to a party and you're hoping it's one of those ones with heavy hors d'oeuvres, because you don't want to pay for a meal later
Right.
time, but you want something that's going to fill you up. But you might still need to get a more heavier meal. So it's more of like a heavy hors d'oeuvres personal finance book that I'll get you quick answers, but lots and lots of resources of where to go to get more information.
Sooner or later, somebody is going to call this a bathroom book, Michelle, and I will tell you that that's a compliment, because they will leave it in the bathroom and they will just visit it every time they're there, and they'll get educated along the way.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't mind that at all. Like my bathroom magazine is Consumer Reports and Kiplinger and some of your books.
There you go.
Because it's like it's a lot to sit down and go through a financial book, because there's so much you need to know, and a lot of it is over your head and you're just worried. And so it is exactly that kind of book. You can put it down, you can pick it up, you can skip around, and it's also, you don't have to be in crisis. I don't want the title to make people think, well, I haven't lost my job, this isn't for me. Because what I talk about is like there's the pandemic now, but there'll be a recession, there'll be all kinds of things, and you need to be prepared. Maybe you were prepared this time, but it'll get you better next time, or maybe you just scathed by, and this will help put you in a better position when the next crisis happens, because there will be another one.
I know you and I have both been doing this for such a long time that we know every 8 to 10 years we can count on another crisis. So there is a lot of wisdom in that the best time to prepare for a crisis is when you are not in one. We're getting people joining us. Hi, you all. Hi to Gerard and Melissa and Jim and Deborah. Thank you guys for joining us. Glad to see that you are with us. Please post your questions and comments in the chat. So, Michelle, our topic for today is the sandwich generation. This has been, I think, one of those moments in time where we realize the amount of responsibility that we have for the people in our families older than us and younger than us,
Mhm.
because they have been under stress simultaneously with us.
Yeah.
What have you seen in the last year in terms of people stepping up and helping to take care of their kids and their older parents?
Yeah, there's been so much of that. Adult children launched and then had to come back home either for health reasons or they lost their job or to help out their parents, quite frankly. So we've seen a lot of that. And what I actually love about it is that people realize that it's not such a bad thing to have these multi-generational households. But I think it also showed how fragile people were financially, particularly parents who were taking, maybe sort of keeping an eye on their young adult children and then their parents and realizing that anything that upset the normal thing was traumatic for the family financially. And I think now more people are thinking about their money like, hey, I thought I had enough, but I didn't. Or I thought my adult children were in better shape and they weren't.
So, as you look out to the future, if you, I mean, is the game plan for knowing that you have a solid financial backbone different than it was going into COVID? What are the signs that you've got your act together versus not having your act together?
I think that's such a great question. I think people, because it's just how we live day to day. We do our things. We kind of know what's in our bank accounts. We kind of know what's in our retirement account, but we don't really know. And so people now are saying, hey, I really needed to keep an eye on the fact that my emergency fund only lasted me a month or even
Mhm.
half a month, or that I didn't realize all the rules around how to pull out money from my retirement account. And so we were getting basic questions like, what if I take this out? The people didn't even realize you don't have to take it all out at one time. Just do it month to month. And I think it made people aware of how unaware they were. If you ask most people, and I'm sure you know this, Gene, you ask people, how you're investing in your retirement, they don't know. They just know they put money in there. They don't know what it's investing in. They don't know if it's enough. They don't know if they've got, a Roth or, 401k within the Roth within a 401k. It was very surprising how little people knew. Well, maybe it wasn't really surprising. I mean, I know people don't know, but I think when you get in a crisis, it's just everything seems so insurmountable. And now with the pandemic, I think there's a lot of hunger for financial news in a way that I really need to know what I'm doing. I didn't have anywhere near what I thought I should have had. And also, I speak in colloquialisms because I'm from Baltimore. But people didn't want to get into other people's business. Like adult parents didn't want to really ask their adult children, like, how much are you making, honey? Do you have money put aside?
Mhm.
And they didn't want to feel intrusive. And same thing with their parents. And now I think people realize we got to ask those questions because if something happens, they're going to need to rely on me, and I need to know what they're doing and how much they have.
Yeah, and I think sometimes more with our parents than with our kids, but sometimes with our kids, if they're really striving hard for independence and they push back when we start asking questions, sometimes we don't realize we have to ask those questions more than once. I actually just wrote a story about this for Her Money, and sometimes you have to ask 3 or 4 or 5 times just to get your parents started talking to you about what they want and what they have and what their concerns are and what their fears are, and we have to understand that it's okay to ask more than once.
That's right. I'm gonna link to that. To my people, wait, when we finish this, I'm gonna tweet that because you're absolutely right. Because we've gotten to the point in this country where everybody has to have their own space, and you're not supposed to tell anybody. You're not supposed to ask. And so you have to ask both your parents and your adult children. I have a 26-year-old who's living with us by choice, and we begged her to. And when she was going through which job to take, well, how much they paying you? What are the benefits? And once she started working, I was like, well, how's that check going? What are you saving? And at one time I asked her a question and she kind of just sat back and she's like, I know you're not asking me about my business. And I said, well, honey, how am I going to help you and put you in the right direction if I don't have answers? I'm not just asking. Well, she knows her mother. Her mother wants to know everything. But finally she realized that I was just trying to make sure she's making really good decisions. Like, for example, when she was picking healthcare, there's two kind of healthcare plans, and there was like a Cadillac plan and the thinner one. And she's like, well, I'm just going to take the less expensive one. And I said, no, you need to have full coverage. And then there was an option for, vision care. And she's like, well, I don't need no glasses. I said, but what if something pops in your eye?
Yeah, absolutely. I went through the same decision-making process with my son when he was picking his health insurance plan. And you better believe I led him to the more expensive coverage, and he's got some underlying conditions. And so that was important. But I think our kids in particular feel so often that they're invincible, because they're invincible in so many ways that we have to help them understand the risks. Courtney writes that she thinks the pandemic really sparked an interest for people to be more financially literate. I think she's right about that. I mean, we are seeing on the education front, more states tee up bills for financial education mandates than we have in quite some time. But I'm wondering, do you think people are really interested in financial literacy at this point, or do you think they just want to invest their stimulus checks and make some money?
I think it's actually both. I think people want to know more because they realize what they didn't know. And I think there's a lot, we talk about this K-shaped recovery. So it looks just like a K, like people up here and people down here. And so the people who are actually doing well want to know more about how to invest. And then, you have GameStop and you got Bitcoin, and there's all this news about investing.
Yeah.
And so they want to know how to grow their money and how to protect the money that they're going to need for emergencies and retirement and things like that. And that's a great thing. And I endorse all those bills and teaching kids about money in school and college, but I also want to be sure that we have a component that includes the parental influences, because we know that studies show that the way people retain information that they learn is that it's practiced and reinforced by their peers or their parents. And so my kids got some in school, but my husband and I, we kind of had our own little curriculum for our children to reinforce whatever they learned in school. And it has to be joint that way. Otherwise, you know what it's like. You took a course in college, and right after that final exam, it's like all that knowledge just flew
right out of your head.
Right.
Exactly.
I can't tell you nothing about geometry right now.
I know. I wish I could remember my algebra too. I don't know what I would do with it, but I really do wish I could remember it. Melissa too points out that she believes that her daughters, and by the way, her 4 daughters moved back in with her during COVID. Right. They gained more respect for her economic wisdom during this time. That's really good to hear, Melissa.
That is so good to hear.
Michelle, I know one of the things that you do, and it's a passion for you, is you teach at your church. You teach financial literacy. You teach it for people before they get married. You teach it for them before they even date, which is incredible. A big component of your teaching has to do with making smarter decisions overall. Right. Can you explain to us how we can all make smarter decisions about our money?
Yeah. So I structure the curriculum on the program that I teach. It's a year-long program, by the way. And when I do it in the community, we shorten it. But the first several sessions, we don't pull out a budget. We don't pull out a template. We don't look at any bank accounts. We talk about good decision-making. And we spend a fair amount of time walking through the steps on how to make a good decision, because that actually isn't taught. Even in the best financial literacy programs, there isn't a component that says This is how you make a decision, step by step by step. So we have like 6 to 7 steps to teach people how to make a decision, looking at all the alternatives. And actually, the cost of a decision is like 4 or 5 down. It's like, define what you're thinking about the decision you're trying to make. Why do you want to make it now? What are the alternatives? What are your non-negotiables? And then we get to cost. Because a lot of times by the time we get to cost, they're like, yeah, I can't do this.
So
go ahead.
I was thinking, one of the decisions that we talk about often on this show are all of the decisions involved in figuring out how to plan for your retirement, and in particular, how to make sure that you have enough money to live on in your retirement. And as you're sort of parsing those kind of decisions, what would be the considerations? Let's say you're somebody who is 60 some years old, you're thinking of retiring, you've got some money in an IRA or a 401k, you need to stretch that out and make it last forever. Mm-hmm. How do you decide how much to pull out, whether you should buy an annuity, whether you should invest for growth, when to take Social Security? That's about 12 decisions right there. Right.
Yeah. I think at that point, people need help. I really believe that people should spend the money to hire a financial planner, fee only, make sure you understand how they're getting paid. You want to make sure that they are a fiduciary. So there's somebody who's going to help you make decisions in your best interest and not theirs, which is unbelievable that actually has to be said. So that you know how to stretch that money, or whether an annuity makes sense for you or not. And if you're really good with your money and very frugal, you could be able to make that last. How much every year should you take out? So we spend so much time teaching people to save, invest. And we don't tell them how to use that money once they hit that milestone. And so one of the questions we get all the time is, well, how do I spend this money now? How much do I take out every year? How do I pair that with Social Security and other things? And so it's not a one-off decision, to your point. So whether you get annuity, whether you get when you take Social Security, it has to be made in conjunction with other decisions. First, where are you going to live? And then, are you dragging a mortgage into retirement? And in that case, how do you use that money from your other pots to pay that mortgage? And so before you make a decision about any of those things, you've got to look at the full picture. And that's why I think you hire someone who can look at, Social Security, what you have in your retirement, how long it's going to last, where you're going to live. What happens in terms of healthcare? What kind of healthcare coverage do you have to supplement, Medicare? And so it has to be done all together to make sure that you make the best decision for yourself.
Courtney asks, on average in the US, how much money do people need to retire? And I'm just listening to your answer to the previous question, and I wonder if on average is the wrong way to look at it, right? You have to look at it personally.
That is exactly right. We want benchmarks, right? That's how we live. Like, we should weigh this amount of money, or we should have a piece of steak that's this big. We like to have those things because it helps us. But it's called personal finance for a reason. It's very personal. What you need, Courtney, is different from what I need. I'm really frugal, so I don't have to worry about some of the same things other people are going to need in retirement. We're going to pay our mortgage off before we retire. If you take a mortgage into retirement, that means you're going to have to pull more from your savings than perhaps I would. But if you want a benchmark, I think Fidelity actually has come up with one that I think is very reasonable, that you save about up to 15% of your pay to put in retirement. Now, that's a great deal of money for many people. So just try to reach that. And that's 15%, including any employer match. But if you can't reach that 15%. Start with 2, then every
Yep.
year move it up. But just make sure that you figure out what you're going to need. If you're going to stay in the house that you're going to pay off, well, then you won't maybe need as much. You're not going to need 2 or 3 million maybe, or whatever the number that they make us scared to death that we're supposed to have. Are you willing to go live with someone or have someone come live with you if the numbers don't work out? Let's say you've been running your life as life happens. You had kids, you had all kinds of stuff, and you reach the 40s and 50s and you look up and you think, I just don't have enough to quit. What am I going to do? So then you got to think differently. I might need to move to a lower cost area. I can't live in a big city. Talk to your adult children. It's like, hey, mama might, have to come live with you. I'm okay with the back room, long as you give me cable or streaming service. But you got to have those conversations. And so your retirement is going to look different.
Yeah, for sure. And Gerard points out you have to look at what your lifestyle is going to be. And I think sometimes, and what you're talking about right here is in your 40s and in your 50s, if you realize that you're not getting there as far as your retirement savings goals, downshifting that lifestyle sooner rather than later is a really helpful thing to do.
That's right.
Barbara wonders, where or how do you suggest finding a great financial planner? That's a question I get asked all the time.
Yeah, you could probably answer it better than me.
Well, no, I think you are going to suggest probably the same things that I'm going to suggest. There are a lot of wonderful organizations that you can look at. The National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, or NAPFA, is the fee-only financial planning association. At hermoney.com, we also have a free tool that you can use to get a recommendation for a fiduciary financial advisor. You fill out a questionnaire and we'll serve up 3 recommendations. And by the way, nobody is going to call you. It's all up to you if you want to follow through and call them. But people are finding that is helpful. But I think what else would you suggest?
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to tee it up for you. I love that that on your site that they don't call you, because that's why a lot of people don't use those tools, because then you start getting all these calls and it's very annoying. Like if you ever want to get a car, you fill out that little form. Now you got like every dealer calling you. And so I like that part of what you offer people. And then ask someone who may have a planner. I try to vet people. And so because I work and do work with my church, I sort of identify people and then I recommend them in a sense of, this is a person that has, first of all, served and volunteered. And so I kind of know their philosophy. When you're really looking for someone who is going to have the same financial philosophy as you. Like I couldn't have a planner that would be telling me it's okay to take your mortgage in retirement. That's not going to align with the thing that I want to do, which is get rid of the most expensive thing in my budget is my house.
Right.
And so, for example, my husband and I tithe, or we get 10% of our gross income to our church. If you're Jewish, there's another, I forget what it's called. Where you're
tzedakah.
Thank you. And so there are people who have those beliefs that if you're Muslim, there's also a belief that you give a certain percentage of your income, or you donate some money. So I wouldn't want to meet with a planner who looked at how much we give, which is a great amount of money, 10% of our gross, and go, what in the world? You should be putting that in the market, which what someone said to me. And I said, well, that's not what we believe. And then I had a planner who she's like, yeah, that's a lot of money. And then when I explained to her, she's like, okay, well, then let's figure out how to be more aggressive in the money that you are investing so that you can continue to gain ground because you're giving so much away. And so you want to make sure that they're listening to you and what you want to do, the kind of life and retirement. If they come with a pre-plan and you should put your money in here, that's not the person you want. And now see, here's the other thing that people don't realize. When you hire someone, you need to also do your research behind what they recommend. Even the best planners. We had the most fabulous planner, but she suggested that we put money in a 529 plan that her company, used. Well, it wasn't appropriate for us because we used the Maryland State 529 plan because we got a state tax deduction. So she recommended it. I said, let me do some research. And I came back to see, she said, yes, but that's what we have to do, right? Like we have to tell you about this plan. And it's not, I didn't think her advice was wrong, but it wasn't something that was completely appropriate for us. So you can't just listen to what they say and just do it and not do your own research. And I guess my point is, y'all, I get it. This financial stuff is tough. Mm-hmm. And it's mind-boggling, but you don't let anyone tell you what to do and you not check up on it and that you do your own research. So that means you cannot be financially lazy with this money stuff. I get it, it's hard for you, but you got to do your due diligence.
100%. And I think that's a really important point. Sometimes when we have a doctor or a financial planner or a lawyer or even, a designer who's helping us decorate an apartment or a room in our apartment, we think, oh, well, I hired this person and they're the expert, so I have to do exactly what they say. Well, no, it's okay to say to your decorator, I don't want that wall to be white. I want that wall to be gray. And it's okay to say to your financial advisor, I'm not comfortable with that recommendation. I think this is better for me.
Exactly right. I love that. It's like, why you get a second opinion from a doctor? Because you want to be, first of all, it's also a way to confirm that perhaps they are right. But that's so true. I mean, I tell you, I'm going to be really honest. We've had different financial planners and they've all been great. But one of them, he's like, oh, you guys are too aggressive. You just need to pull back. And he was very conservative. And my husband was like, well, we're really good savers. We're very frugal. We've been so conservative in our financial portfolios. I mean, just crazy. Like, Jean, you would think I was insane. In my 20s and 30s, just bonds. Like, I was like, what is wrong with me? And so we were really trying to make a little bit of ground. And we knew that we would have less expenses in retirement, so we could afford to take that extra risk. Man, I'm so glad I didn't listen to that man, because our portfolio has outperformed like crazy, because we're more in equities than would be recommended for our age. But because we were looking at the rest of how we live our lives, we felt we could take that risk. He was doing the right thing. He made the right recommendation, but we overruled him.
Because the rest of your life is like a bond. The rest of your life is that conservative, and you are able to stretch. And I think people need to look at their careers and ask, is my job a stock or a bond? Is this a risky line of work where I don't know that I'm going to have this income going forward? And if so, you have to tweak the other portions of your financial life. Barbara said you threw out the number of 2 to 3 million for retirement. Is that generally considered a decent goal for a couple or a single person? Barbara, really, gosh, it depends. The benchmarks that Michelle was talking about, the fidelity benchmarks, are that you should try to have about 1 times your income put away for retirement by the time you're 30,
right?
3 times by the time you're 40, 6 times by 50, 8 times by 60, and 10 times by the time you actually retire. And she's right about not trying to force yourself to get there overnight if you can't get there overnight. Somebody told us in the chat, who was this? I think it was Melissa, that she was able to hit a 12% contribution by nudging up by 1% every year, which is exactly the way to go. So good on that.
Yeah. And even with those benchmarks, let's say that's what you make a certain amount and that's what that benchmark says, because that number can scare the bejesus out of you.
Yes.
Again, to your point, Jean, if you have a bond type lifestyle, you may not need that $3 million. If you're not going to take a mortgage into retirement, you may not need that, because you don't need to pull for that money to pay for your housing. If you're willing to share housing, you may not need that much. So the one thing I don't want you to do is be so overwhelmed and scared of that number that you don't do anything, or you just sort of throw your hands up and say, oh, well, I'm never going to reach that. Let me just go to Jamaica every year.
Yeah.
My life.
Yeah. Or that you don't live,
Right.
right? That you don't have a life, that you don't enjoy the time that you have, because if this year taught us nothing else, it taught us that time on this planet is very, very precious, and we want to make sure that we enjoy it too. I
Mhm.
know that you recently completed a 10-part series on race and money. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what the overarching lessons are in terms of the differences?
Yeah, so with and we can now say murder of George Floyd,
Yes.
and a lot of the systemic racism that still exists, I wanted to weigh in. And as a journalist and a columnist, you always have to sort of be careful about how you talk about these things, especially race. But I just felt that I needed to talk about the fact that it is still present. Systemic racism is still present in the housing market. It's still, I mean, we look at, for example, credit scores, and we think, well, that's got to be race neutral, right? It's just looking at the numbers. But when you back out that, if you know that redlining caused a great many of African Americans not to be able to get a house or afford a house by government policy, mind you, that means that they are more likely to be renters. And because your rent isn't impacted into your credit score, you have a depressed credit score. If you have a depressed credit score, you're going to pay more for that house that you do eventually get, or that car that you buy. And so all of that racism is built into the system. And I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about why my grandmother was so scared of investing, which is why I ended up in bonds for most of my young adult life, because she was so afraid of losing her money. But it wasn't unreasonable that she was so afraid, because after doing slavery, doing Jim Crow, even up until the 70s and 80s, you could get your things taken away from you. I mean, we think about the Red Summer of 1919, when so many African Americans' homes and businesses were burned across the country. And so her fears were legitimate. She passed those fears on to me, which is
Mm-hmm.
why I didn't want to get into stocks and equities. I talked about microaggressions and how, as an African American, you're exposed to these things, and they may seem so minor, but a lifetime, the totality of these microaggressions just weighs on you. I mean, things like, if I was at the theater in Washington in a front row seat, my husband are theater lovers. We have a full subscription. We get the best seats that we can get. We pay cash for it. We save for it. And this white woman came up to me after one performance and said, "Oh, you have great seats. You must know someone in the cast." And there were people sitting on both sides of me who were white. She didn't ask them how they got their seats. And really, what she was communicating was, "You're Black. How could you possibly afford these really good seats?" So when you get those kinds of things happening to you, I get, in the first part of my career, I was paid less than people with the same education and experience as I had.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to say, hey, y'all, slavery wasn't so long ago that these things are still not happening. And I think lots of people think that those things happened so far ago that it doesn't impact what's happening now. And it's just not true. One historian who was talking about, I was telling him about how people feel like this stuff is so, why are we still talking about this stuff? He said, when you think about it in terms of generations, it's not so long ago. I mean, I know I look 29. It's only been in my lifetime that I, as an African American woman, would have full rights to vote, although now we know what a lot of voter suppression is happening. It's only in my lifetime that we had the Civil Rights Act in the bill, and housing discrimination was outlawed in my lifetime. And my children still experience racism as Black children, and my Black son. And so I just wanted to equate that and make people understand how that relates to money as well. And when you see these statistics that African Americans, don't have as much net worth as whites, we think, well, they just don't handle their money well. They're reckless with their money. Except when you look behind the numbers, you realize that most of that net worth is made up in the equity in your home. And if you were able to get home loans at a greater rate and a less cost than African Americans because then of course you have more net worth. I mean, think about our Black veterans that came back after World War II. They weren't allowed to take advantage of the G bill, and that G bill made the huge difference in this country and creating a solid middle income or class that we were not able to participate in. And I just wanted to talk about that and talk about it in a way that isn't trying to make you feel guilty or bad, but just understand what's behind those numbers that you see.
Yeah. It's an excellent series. And I think too, I mean, you can trace so much of the differences in the wealth gap is traceable to the wage gap, and the wage gap for African Americans is still much larger than it is for African American women, is much larger than it is for white women.
Right.
It all works together, and it still persists. Thank you for talking about it. You mentioned having bonds in your portfolio early in your career and feeling more conservative, and I think at all ages, and for most of us, there is an emotional component to this. It is hard to do money right because so many of our emotions get in the way. What's your trick for factoring them out?
Well, it goes back to that decision tree that I talked to you about. When we give people the steps, there's no step on how do you feel about this. And so I have to take a step back. I handle my investments now how I handle my spending on things. When I want to spend on something big, I put a pause in it. So I may, for example, if I'm buying something on Amazon, I will put it in the cart and wait several days before I purchase it. And usually what happens is I even forget about it, which means I didn't really need it, right? And so the same thing with my investments. I think about it before I make them. I look at them. I reevaluate them. I'm constantly looking at my portfolio. Y'all don't recommend you do this because it'll drive you nuts. But I just look at how things are behaving. For example, I have outside income, like, Jean, I have books since I get paid and I get 1099s. And so I get to put money in a SEP, IRA or a simple IRA. And so I was looking at how to invest that money. And I was just like, I don't know. So I did the research and I make sure and I put it in something and it wasn't really performing the way I wanted. I took a pause. I looked at the research and I said, I'm going to move my money because this isn't really doing what I'd like. And so it's just always, I would say, put a pause in how you spend your money. And usually during that pause, if you do your research, you'll make the right decision. And that's kind of how I don't let my emotions, get the best of me. And I don't say that it doesn't always do that, but it has served me well to put a pause. Even to how, where do my kids go to school? Like, well, let's just think about that. Our kids hate that. When we make that phrase, they just go.
No, but it's perfect. It is. It's perfect for any major decision. Putting a little space between you and that decision is very, very smart advice. I know you hold regular chats as part of your job with the Washington Post, and you just got off a tax chat. So I'm going to throw this tax question at you that comes from Anne Marie. She's got most of her retirement in a simple IRA through her employer, and she just began funding a Roth IRA the past 2 years. She's 50 and she wants to know what she should be thinking about as far as Roth conversions.
Oh man, Roth conversions. Now so you have to understand what you're trying to do. And this is going to go counter to what you had. So the reason why people want to put money in Roth is because they know that when you take the money out, it's not taxed, right? But for me, it's not a matter of Roth or 401k. It's just saving because you're going to pay that tax bill at the beginning or the end. You're not going to be able to get around paying those taxes. Now, for example, my husband and I don't have any Roths. First of all, when they were first introduced, we were making too much. But even if we weren't, I wanted to put more money to work for myself than I would have had I funded a Roth. So with a Roth, let's say $1,000. So you'd pay taxes on that I'm just going to make the numbers even. It might not make sense, but like, so
Okay.
if you have $1,000 and you put a Roth, then you have to pay the taxes. So you only have $800 to put in. But if I use a 401k, I get to put the whole $100 and a whole $100,000 in there and have that work for me year over year. And if your tax situation really isn't going to change that much, then it doesn't really make a difference whether you do a traditional IRA or 401k or a Roth. When you do a conversion, you've got to have the money to pay the taxes. And it can't really be from the money that you're pulling out, because then you're going to like not get ahead.
Right.
So for many people who are frantic about doing a Roth conversion, it really isn't worth the taxes that you're going to pay now, because you got to pay it on all of that you pull out, as opposed to waiting to the end. Yeah, you got to pull the money and pay taxes out, but not all at once. And as you get older, you may actually be in a lower tax bracket or the same. So I think you should think very carefully before assessing about doing a Roth IRA. And you never should make financial decisions just based on the tax situation. That's a sign that you're about to make a bad decision if you're only looking at the taxes.
Thank you. Thank you for that. A couple of additional questions. Barbara would like to know, would you expand on the importance of using a fiduciary?
So financial folks sort of fall into two categories. Those who they're supposed to always make decisions that are appropriate for you. Like, you wouldn't put a 90-year-old in like Bitcoins, right? But a fiduciary is supposed to make decisions that's in your best interest. So they're not supposed to be telling you, for example, to put money in a mutual fund that their company pushes because it's going to work better for them. They're supposed to look at the universe and say, okay, given your risk tolerance and how you want to invest, this is the most appropriate for you. That's in your best interest. And so the thing about the fiduciary is that by law, now, of course, things happen the way they happen. It's not a guarantee, but a fiduciary is supposed to look at everything as it relates to your personal situation financially and make the decision that is in your best interest. That is the key phrase that you want to look at. So you would ask them, are you a fiduciary? Do you have to make decisions based in my best interest? And I personally feel that is the better person to go with. It doesn't make this other people bad.
Right.
But you want to make sure that you're getting advice from someone who's going to put you first and not their commission first.
We're going to wrap it up with this one. Jean asks us, she says she's not sure this fits into today's discussion, but Jean, I think this question fits into any discussion. We are about to have our first grandchild. We'd like to establish a savings account for this child. Should we start a 529, an UGMA? What's the best for the long run?
So I like control. I'm a control freak. You probably get that.
No, I had no idea.
Doesn't come as a surprise. I like plans and savings accounts and tax advantage accounts that give you full control. UGMA does not, because once that child becomes of age, depending on your state, they could take that money and buy a red Corvette. And trust me on that, I would not be a happy camper if that was my grandchild. So I would recommend a 529 plan. And you can, it doesn't tie you to any one state, and you get a tax advantage. And if you live in a state that would that gives a tax deduction for that, then you get that bonus as well. So in Maryland, you get $2,500 per account. If you're a couple, you get two. So that's like $5,000 my husband and I would get off of our taxes. So grandmom, that's what you should look at. So if you're in a state that gives you that, and that's great. And you can invest it just like you would anything else. I would recommend an age-based portfolio. So they invest it based on the age of the child. So since it's a new baby, it's going to be more aggressive rather than conservative. And if you do that now and you put maybe about $250 a month, that child will have enough with the growth, the average growth in an age-based portfolio for 529 plan to go to a state school with no debt at all. So that's how I would recommend it. If you're not sure, you want to put all of it in a tax advantage vehicle, because when you put it in a tax vehicle, if that child doesn't go to college or you have to take it out, you're subject to a 10% penalty if you don't use it for qualified education expenses. So you could split the difference. You could put, $200 or so in the 529 plan, and 100 and a Roth if you qualify for it, or some other investment. A growth index fund would be great, and that way you have full control. The money still grows. You don't get the tax advantage, but you still can use it to help your grandchild go to college. But I recommend a 529 plan fully. But if you want even more control, you can split the difference. I just wouldn't put it into something that they get to keep that money when they turn a certain age and you have no say over it.
Yeah, boy, you never know how they're going to think when they get to be
Right.
that age. And if you want to compare 529 plans, there's a good website called savingforcollege.com that lets
Right.
you compare whether the performance of the one in your state is as good as the performance of ones in other states, or
Right.
whether you should skip the tax deduction and go for the performance. But it can just be a helpful thing to look at.
Right.
Michelle, we're going to wrap it up here. Tell me one more time, what's the name of the book? Where do I get it?
So the name of the book is What to Do with Your Money When a Crisis Hits. You can pre-order it now, and I would love if you did that. And you can get it on all the major book platforms: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores. Let's support our independent bookstores. And you know what else? If you can't afford it, that's okay. You can ask your library to order a copy. I'm okay with that. I really am. I just want you to get the information however it's best for you and how affordable it is for you. And it is an affordable book, but I just want you to get the information.
You're a gem. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Isn't she wonderful, guys? I love she. She's so wonderful.
Anytime. And if you are looking for more information, I hope that you'll check out the website of the Alliance for Lifetime Income. You can find it at protectedincome.org. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.